Hello, everyone. My name is Katherine Kreidler with the National Sports Media Association, and today I have the privilege to interview the 2024 National Sports Media Association Sportswriter of the Year from Oregon, Bill Oram. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
Of course. So, first of all, congratulations on winning. And what was your reaction when you found out?
I was thrilled. I have so much respect for the organization and the winners who've come before me. I grew up in Oregon, reading a lot of the people who have won this award over the years. Some of the great, Jason Quick, Dwight James, John Canzano, going back throughout the history of sports journalism in Oregon. Those people helped shape my path and inspired me to choose this career. So have the opportunity to kind of um, have a small part in that legacy is really meaningful to me.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about how your interest for sports started?
So I became a sports fan really early on. I grew up kind of at the time of the Clyde Drexler, Terry Porter, Jerome Kersey Trailblazers. They were really good going head to head with the Bulls in 1992 in the finals. Um, I have family members who are really into the Trailblazers. My grandmother, who has since passed away, and my aunt were huge catalysts in that way. My aunt was a school teacher, and she had posters all over her classroom of the Blazers, and a lot of those kind of got handed down to me and ended up on my walls. And some of the posters were parts of special sections in the Oregonian as part of like a preseason section, and then my aunt Jan had laminated those for her classroom, and so they ended up in my bedroom eventually. So
Fun.
these full page biographies and stats of Clyde Drexler, Buck Williams, who became my favorite player, Jerome Kersey, and they were staples of my bedroom until I went away to college. So understanding sort of that intersection of the sports I was seeing on TV with the media component that people at the Oregonian newspaper were doing, and it ending up as like something that I cherish and in fact still have in storage. They're not on my bedroom walls anymore, but I still have in storage and have visions of finding a use for again someday or passing on to my kids.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey of becoming a sports writer?
Yeah, so I identified at a really young age that I wanted to do this.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm sure there are people who figured it out younger, but I think I was in seventh or eighth grade,
Oh, wow.
and I had a teacher who was a huge motivator for me. And I remember we had a middle school newspaper, and it was really just sheets of paper stapled together. But I wrote something horrible, like 15 players who were ready for like an NBA breakout or something like that. And this teacher who actually officiated my wedding a long time later. That's how important he
Oh,
was to me. But
cool.
he said like, "Wow, Bill, I wouldn't be surprised if you really did become a sports journalist." And like that was such an inspiring thing to hear at what would that be, 12 years old, 11 years
Hmm.
old. And so I kind of had that in mind. I ended up working for the community newspaper. I'm from a very rural town in Oregon along the Oregon coast. A weekly newspaper called the Headlight Herald allowed me to write articles about my high school sports teams. And I think I got paid $90 a week for that. So that was my first job in
Okay.
sports journalism. And I even covered the boys basketball team, which I played on. So there was a little bit of a conflict of interest early on in my career. And then, I selected a college based on that desire to become a journalist. I went to the University of Montana, which has a tremendous journalism program. I had I really fell in love with that area and the idea of, going through that school of journalism, had some amazing mentors there. I became the editor of the newspaper by my senior year. And I did internships every year. And I think that that's probably a common story of people who've, stuck it out in this business. But I, again, had the opportunity to be exposed to lots of different kinds of stories, different kinds of subjects, and I had great editors along the way. I had, whether it was in Tillamook, Oregon, at the Headlight Herald, or the Dalles Chronicle, another small town newspaper that is actually now defunct. And then I went to the Austin American Statesman, and then I had an internship after my senior year at the Washington Post. And so that was all kind of building toward this career where I had the opportunity to just work with some amazing people at every stop. And then I my first real job, I guess you'd say, was at the Salt Lake Tribune. I had the opportunity to cover high school sports there. Sort of randomly. I'd never lived in Utah, didn't know anybody in Utah, but applied for a job that felt like a perfect fit. And in my time there, I guess you'd say rose through the ranks, and I covered high school sports, taking my own stats, driving all across the state of Utah, covering all sorts of sports, finding stories that went you know, beyond the what was obvious and the scores. Had editors who held me accountable, told me when my work wasn't good, um, you know, weren't afraid to, practice tough love with me, and really held a standard that I knew I needed to hew to. And so I look at I was there for 3.5 years, and I look at my years in Salt Lake as some of the most important and formative and probably the best education I ever got in journalism, just because I was doing so much and I was working, every day. I was writing multiple stories a day. I was in touch with people all over the state in a variety of sports.
Hmm.
It was a fire hose, and it was more than I could have possibly kept up with, but the challenge was trying. And that led to an opportunity to cover the 2012 Summer Olympics in London,
Oh,
and
cool.
um, and then I was promoted to cover the Utah Jazz. I did that for a year, which led to an opportunity to cover the Lakers for the Orange County Register, and I spent the next 9 years covering the Lakers. And I did that at the Register and later at the Athletic. And I mean, maybe we can get into that, but I mean, covering Kobe Bryant and some of the worst teams in Lakers history, but then seeing the upswing again once they got LeBron and Anthony Davis, and then
Mhm.
the pandemic, and they won a championship in the bubble. It was just a incredibly varied stretch of seasons, and living in Los Angeles, and covering that team, being exposed to sort of the front row of Hollywood glamour. But my heart was always in the Northwest. I
Mhm.
wear a lot of plaid shirts. Like I went to college in Montana. I'm from a small logging town, dairy town in Oregon, and so I always had a goal of returning home. And in 2022, when John Canzano, who was the longtime columnist, the Oregonian, a legend, decided to do something different and start his own business, I applied, and you know it's uh, it's extremely gratifying to be in this position where I now get to tell the stories of my home state, and um, you know be a reporter in communities that I lived in, and in locker rooms that seemed like
Mhm.
magic kingdoms. I mean, the idea of being in the Trailblazers locker room after a game, would have
Yeah.
been the most exciting thing I could have done as a 5-year old, 10-year old, 15-year old, 20-year old, and now that's my workplace quite often.
That's
So that's
awesome.
probably not the Reader's Digest version. That was the longer version, but
No, that's great.
that at least got us from point A, like at least
Yeah,
cradle to now at least.
that's incredible. So you worked a lot of jobs. You
Hmm.
mentioned going to school in Montana, you're from Oregon, and then Salt Lake, LA. Would you say like moving around so much, like was that ever a challenge? Or
I think starting new is always a challenge,
yeah.
because you're biting off so much. And so, for me, it was more about the job than the location. And I also had ingrained in me from a very early age in the business, right? So like in my early 20s,
Mhm.
you go where the job is. And
Right.
I wasn't married and didn't have kids yet, so I had the flexibility in my life to do that. Like I wouldn't now. It's
Hmm.
different now. But I was very focused on finding a job that would allow me to practice journalism and tell stories, and sports were kind of the venue I wanted to do that in. And so um, every time I moved to someplace new, it was daunting, absolutely, because um, there's so much that's unknown. With in Salt Lake, for example, not only was I covering what I think was like 120 high schools, working
Oh,
with people I
wow.
didn't know. There's
Yeah.
a whole cultural element in Utah that, with the Church of Latter-day Saints, that like
Mhm.
I, was not familiar with at all, and I didn't know how I would, like would people who were culturally different than what I grew up with, would that require different reporting skills to navigate? Would I be sensitive to the right things at the right moment? All those were things I had to learn, and they made me better, and I think a more careful and disciplined reporter and storyteller. Um, I did a story once where I kind of followed a soccer player whose dad was dying of cancer, and I did a story kind of through the final days of this father's life, and through his funeral and burial, kind of through the eyes of this like son who was playing high school soccer at the time. And the family was incredibly welcoming, and and they were members of the church and let me into spaces that I don't think normally I would be permitted. And
Yeah.
that was very meaningful, the trust that like they showed me. And then in a very different way, going and covering the Lakers and being in the locker room where it's all of a sudden that now I need to know how to interact with Kobe Bryant, who is um a larger than life figure, obviously, even when he was playing, and certainly intimidating. And having to figure out how to go toe to toe with him from a subject reporter standpoint, although I don't think I was ever, I don't think he ever saw us as going toe to toe, but I had to hold my own in conversation and interviews with him
Yeah.
and other people kind of around. I mean, there's so many eyes on that organization and so many, um, uh, so many people trying to tell those stories that you got to be really thoughtful and creative about where to kind of plant your flag and try to find stories that were going to be that could be yours.
Right. That's so interesting. So you mentioned reporting at going to the Olympics and then
Mhm.
Kobe. Where have you had like any particular moment where you knew like, oh, I made it, like an I made it moment?
No, because like I have crippling self-doubt, like so many people in this business,
Yeah.
and have major imposter syndrome. And so I'm waiting for somebody to tell me like we made a huge mistake, like you shouldn't be here. In fact, is that what this call is? Is this for you to tell me that I'm actually not the Oregon Sportswriter of the Year? Because that'd be really mean
No.
if you let
No,
me
you
talk for like
are.
8 minutes and
Congratulations.
okay, thank you. I mean that, I would say that I do have moments where I try to ground myself and say like, this is what you wanted to do. And, you know, I had the Oregonian on such a pedestal when I was young, and
Mhm.
I had the wherewithal and probably the mentors uh, to who told me that the Oregonian was one of the great newspapers of the West, and it was, and I think we still do some journalism that I'd put head to head with anyone in the country. And um, the opportunity to come work there full time, I did actually, I left this out of my my opus about my career, but I had spent 6 months at the Oregonian before I went to Salt Lake in a
Okay.
like internship role, and so that was very meaningful. But to be here now in this capacity, to be uh, a voice for a state that I value so much and that I cherish, and I um, feel a real stake of ownership in,
Hmm.
is very meaningful to me. And so I would never say that I made it, um, but because I'm always striving for something more, and I'm always trying to
Yeah.
get somewhere else, not in terms of another job, but as in terms of like personal growth and the reporter and writer I want to be and the kinds of stories I want to tell. um, but I do try to remind myself that if I could have at 18 years old picked any job in the country that I'd want to have, I mean, it probably would have been, writing the back page column for Sports Illustrated like Rick Riley, or being the columnist of the Oregonian. And that, to even say that out loud, um it does feel very, very meaningful. And I try to have reverence for that feeling, because I know that it's a special and rare thing to get to experience that.
Right, that's incredible. Um, my last question, do you have any advice for students or young professionals who are trying to pursue this career?
Mm. I I have so much advice, and I don't know how to distill it into one thing, but I think it would probably be to not get deterred.
Hmm.
There are so many ways to become successful in this career, more so than ever. You will run into a lot of closed doors because a lot of traditional paths are closed. People are looking for one thing or another thing. If you love it, and I think there's a lot of reasons to not pursue journalism.
Hmm.
There's a lot of reasons to. um, you know, you know, look elsewhere in terms of stability and compensation and whatever else. But if you truly love it and you have the and you are determined to stick it out, um, something will open for you. I just truly believe that. And I know that that sounds maybe Pollyannish given some of the challenges of the industry, but um, I do believe that that determination is probably the most valuable trait that anyone can have in journalism. And if you have that, you will find a home and a place to practice, the craft um, and to tell stories. And so doors will open. I can't tell you where they will be or when they will open, but they will open. And I've had my fair share of rejection too, I guess. When you tell your story about, how you got to where you are, you leave out all the people who said no. And
Right.
I applied for when I was in Salt Lake City. I loved my job, but I applied for other jobs that I didn't get. When I was at the Athletic covering the Lakers, 9 years was a long time to cover the Lakers, and
Mhm.
I saw a lot of people I worked with and competed against who became national NBA writers and who got hired at ESPN and the New York Times, and I felt uh, profound doubt in those moments that I wasn't that I was doing the right thing, and wondered when an opportunity would come for me and if it would come. And now I get to tell a very happy story about my homecoming and about how great it is, but I didn't know that was coming. And so I think determination will take you farther than any, writing ability, reporting ability. Um, you know, Stick with it.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's
Thank
a
you,
great
Catherine.
story. I think people following their childhood dreams, I don't know, that's just so encouraging to hear that you actually, in my mind, you made it. And I really think that
Mm.
that's incredible.
Thank you. That's so cool to hear from you, and I really appreciate you letting me tell that story.
Yeah, of course. Well, it was so nice to meet you.
You too.